So, guys, I was reading Way of the Superior Man, and I came across a passage on page 97 that if you can get this passage right and you can write it down and you can understand it and internalize it, and you can really, really understand what it's saying and then implement it, this is basically the root of your PMO change. This passage right here can fundamentally be the core idea of how you move from addiction to complete release, right? So I'll read the passage and then we'll discuss and I'll open up some insights and ideas and applications of it. So it says, right, just remember that self-discipline is not self-suppression. Suppression is when you resist and fight against your desires, keeping them as buried and unexpressed as possible. Self-discipline is when your highest desires rule your lesser desires, not through resistance, but through loving action grounded in understanding and compassion. So super powerful, right? This is basically saying that if you approach PMO with an attitude of self-suppression, where you're saying, well, I'm going to suppress every sexual desire I have, I'm going to suppress every urge, every fantasy, I'm just going to push it down, right? This book is saying, if you resist and you fight your desires and you move against them, it keeps them as buried and unexpressed as possible, right? But they're not going anywhere. You're just pushing them into a room as they build, but the room's not going anywhere. Deep down in your mind, they're going to still be there. And why I love this quote is because it says true self-discipline, which in this case means the day where you still get urges, you still have a libido, right? You might even still think of PMO, but you have the self-discipline to carry on and say no. That happens when your highest desires rule your lesser desires. What that's saying is when you have developed, and this is the journey we're on, when you've developed much higher desires for other things, things like building genuine social connections, working on a life purpose, reading books, learning, starting to work on every piece of your life, developing a desire to self-actualize, developing a desire to build a beautiful relationship with a woman, right? Starting to really think about the vision for life and developing like these much higher values and goals for your life. When you've connected so deeply to those and you're so intricately woven with these new highest desires, having those essentially grounds you and sort of protects you against these lesser desires. So now the PMO desires stay there. You're not fighting them, you're not resisting them, and you're certainly not pushing them down or suppressing them. You've now essentially brought in much higher desires. You've connected yourself and intertwined yourself with desires that are much stronger, much more potent for your life, goals, relationships, career, life purpose, development, right? Building things. Like you've connected so deeply to these desires, which is the contemplations we do, the work you'll do, the journaling, going out, experiencing life. You connect yourself to this side such that this grounds you against these little desires. You see, you don't even have to push them down. They get completely outweighed by these higher values. And that's the way out, right? Like I said in other videos, PMO is not a PMO problem. It's a lack of higher desires, right? So you don't have to actively demonize these. You just bring in the big dogs, right? You bring in something that actually gets you excited for life, something you actually want to be doing, something you actually get excited about. Not cheap PMO, right? So try and understand this quote, and I'll read it again in case you want to write it down or record it. It says, just remember that true self-discipline is not self-suppression, right? So if you catch yourself suppressing and forcing down, you're not on the right path. You must start to notice that and try prevent yourself from blindly self-suppressing, right? Because it says here, self-discipline is not self-suppression. Suppression, which is what we're trying to avoid, is when you resist and fight against your desires, keeping them as buried and unexpressed as possible. Why that's so important is it's basically saying all your efforts to suppress and bury and resist, understand that they're not effective. You're basically just keeping it all there. You're just pushing it deeper and deeper and deeper. So if you can associate suppression essentially with more problems later on, you'll start to feel like, I don't want to suppress anymore, because it means I'm just going to have to deal with it later on. So suppression is a sort of a false removal. You think you've gotten rid of it, but it's kind of like seeing a fire and then looking the other way and thinking that means the fire's gone out. It just means you're not looking at it, but the fire is still there. And obviously with this work, we're after true putting out of the fire, right? And so that's what it's saying, right? It's saying like it keeps them as buried and as unexpressed as they were before. It's still there. So onto self-discipline, which is what we want. Self-discipline is when your highest desires rule your lesser desires, not through resistance, but through loving action grounded in understanding and compassion. So you're no longer resisting things, but you've grounded yourself in loving action, right? You're lovingly acting and engaging with your life and expressing your highest gifts on this side, such that you don't have to resist PMO, the urges, the cravings. They get ruled by this deep grounded loving action, which in a sense is you growing up, having that emotional shift, having that identity change, and connecting to something much more profound, right? So a lot of the work here, and you'll hear this a lot of the work here, like I say, is it's not about PMO, right? It's not about PMO. It's about the rest of your life, right? And it's because in a lot of cases, in almost all cases with addiction, the rest of your life wasn't connected. You weren't connected to anything. You weren't connected to something actually filling the void, actually fulfilling you. That's the only reason PMO became that escape, right? It's not because you wanted PMO. You didn't actively want to do that. It just represented a lack of this loving action that's grounded in understanding of life, compassion, connectedness, like truly being fulfilled, right? So, yeah, guys, if you do have this book or buy it, this is on page 97, like in the middle. I just read this earlier this week and I realized this sums up PMO, right? Because to give you a bit more concrete examples, the self-suppression that we're trying to avoid is often representative of the streak building, the denial of my sexual urges, the denial of all these cravings. You push it down. You're sort of forcing yourself to build a streak whilst denying the fact that you're actually still having a lot of cravings and you still want to do this. We're focusing on self-discipline. Self-discipline is a much softer, much calmer approach to things, right? You're so busy with life that you just occur, or sort of natural self-discipline occurs, right? With no effort. It's kind of like if you're in such an example with people now, if you were in a relationship that was so beautiful, so spiritual, so grounded, and so loving and incredible, you could have another woman approach you one day. You wouldn't have to force yourself not to get with this woman. You would be so grounded and so connected to the relationship you have that it would be easy to say no to this other woman because something else is occupying you so deeply and profoundly that you don't have to resist this other woman. You don't have to, pretend she's not there. You just lovingly say, I'm all good. And that's what we're working here with PMO. We're trying to get to that point where cravings come up and you say, I'm all good. Life is occupying me. I'm connected, right? So that's why this book, Way of the Superior Man, I mentioned it in my other video around some of the books I've read. This is why. So yeah, write this down, really contemplate this, really focus on being honest with yourself and see like, where are you still self-suppressing, and understand that's okay, but just be honest and understand that that isn't what we're trying to aim for. That in a lot of cases is actually going to make the process harder. It's going to make the process worse. It's going to make it more chaotic. All of this suppression builds, it goes under the surface, but it's still there and it's going to prevent you from having that genuine emotional shift. So write this down, really think about it, and stay tuned for more.